Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us for Wordplay 2020. I'm Len, the incoming Executive Director at Hand-Eye Society. Just briefly, Hand-Eye Society is a Toronto-based not-for-profit serving the game curious through exhibition, opportunities, mentorship, and so on. We see video games as a form of creative expression, and we want to invite as many people into the space as possible. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can go to handeyesociety.com or follow us on Twitter at Hand-Eye Society. Below you'll find a link to our community Discord where you can chat about the games or the talks during Wordplay or join our community more generally. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who helped Wordplay 2020 happen, with a big shout out going to Ontario Creates. Without them, Wordplay couldn't have happened. So, from kissing aliens to eating buildings, we hope that you enjoyed the games and the talks that we've curated for you. You can find the entire Wordplay itinerary at handeyesociety.com. I want to say thank you to Rakashi as Festival Director, Jordan Sparks as Technical Director, Aaron Demeter as Volunteer Coordinator, and all of the different Hand-Eye Society staff and volunteers who helped make Wordplay happen. We hope that you enjoy the festival, and we'll see you online.
Hello everyone and welcome back for day 2 of Wordplay. We're just so excited to be able to run this festival, especially with all the things going on. So thank you so much to everyone that's tuning in. Thank you so much to the volunteers, staff, members, everyone. Thank you so much for making this thing happen. We're just so happy and we're just so thankful that we were in a position to be able to support all these creators and artists to showcase their work and have these speakers talk. So without further ado, today's speakers are going to be Kaylin Doyle-Myerscough, Sharang Biswas, and Kinsey Erickson. Again, be sure to check out all the games on handeyesociety.com/wordplay. Check out all the games, play them, follow the creators, do what you have to do, support them, especially in times like these. Your support, it means everything. So without further ado, we're going to show the rest of the speakers for Sunday. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylin Doyle-Myerscough. My pronouns are they and them. Thank you very much to Wordplay for inviting me to speak. Today I'll be talking to you about collaborative critical world building. So this presentation is for you if you're doing world building for a game or interactive project and you want some tips, if you're interested in the theory or history of world building, or if you want to do world building but you don't know where to start. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I am a PhD student. I just started studying cinema and media studies at the University of Chicago. So I'm at the very beginning, but my goal is to study world building for my dissertation. I am also a sessional instructor. I teach game design at OCAD University. And since the beginning of 2019, I've been co-authoring a textbook on critical world building with Damien Carreras, a professor at the City University of Hong Kong. Now, our book is targeted towards people who are getting into world building projects and want to get more of a critical understanding of what world building is and how to do it, informed by sort of critical theory and the humanities. If that sounds like your kind of jam, I recommend we keep in touch. I am also a game designer, and I design a lot of games and do a lot of critical projects about world building. I do a lot of projects that involve world building, of course, and most of all, I want to make games that help people do world building. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of my ongoing projects later. So I approach world building from 2 different perspectives. There's the sort of theoretical perspective of understanding the history and the political and social stakes of world building. And then there's the practical perspective of, I'm a game designer, I want to make interesting, vivid, nuanced worlds. And because of my practical side, I'll begin the presentation proper with a little TLDR. The way we think about world building impacts the world shapes the worlds we research focuses on the history of world building alongside common and popular methods for world building. There's a lot of really great research out there on existing worlds, and of course there's a lot of really good world building out there, but there's not as much work being done on the specific process or the kinds of things that entail world building. My goal is to find better methods and strategies, and by better I mean methods and strategies that create more nuanced worlds, more vivid worlds, and worlds that have important takeaways and that say important things about the world that we live in. And maybe more broadly, to use world building to help imagine other ways that our world could be. But first, let's actually answer the question, what is world building? Because world building is a huge buzzword right now, and it's really easy to talk about world building without realizing what we're talking about. I've had entire conversations with people where it turned out at the end that they were thinking that I was talking about set design or like 3D world creation in Unity or Unreal. And that's not what I'm talking about. So in the textbook, we define world building as the intellectual, organizational, and logistical process of conceptualizing an internally consistent setting. So the work of world building, I divide it into 3 parts. There's intellectual work, organizational work, and logistical work. Now, intellectual work is the very start of the process, where you imagine the sort of core themes and ideas about your world. You start to picture it in your head. You start to come up with interesting ideas. Start to sort of imagine the texture of what everyday life is like in the world that you're conceiving of. So this is speculation, this is imagination, this is empathizing with the experience of people who live in your world. This is imagining how things might be under different circumstances. So once you've done that work, then you have to start organizing that work. Because at a certain point, you have so many details that they become impossible to remember all in your head. So organizational work is finding a system or systems to organize the information that you've created through the sort of intellectual process. So this could be maps, this could be timelines, this could be encyclopedias, this could be wikis. And then over the course of your organizational process, you're going to find that contradictions start to pop up. Maybe one detail factually contradicts another detail in your world. Maybe you imagine your world as being a pretty great place to live, but as you think more about the sort of economics and social reality of your world, you realize that it would actually not be very fun at all. So logistical work is the process of revising, altering, and resolving details so that they all make sense together and feel like they take place in the same world. This could involve revisions, this could involve removing details in your world, this could involve editing details so they make sense together, and this could also involve scoping. So within the logistical process, there's internal logistics, which is where you resolve a contradiction between 2 details that take place within your world. And then there's external logistics, which is where, let's say you want to have 10 different distinct fashion styles in your world, but you're making a game by yourself and you can't make 10,000 assets with different clothing. So that's a sort of logistical process as well, but instead of changing details to accommodate each other, you're changing details to accommodate the reality of your ability to realize the world that you're developing. So that's the sort of broad process of what world building is. Now, where did it come from, and how did we sort of land on a specific set of practices as we have? Now, the creation of settings has, of course, been around for a long time, and there are a lot of people who would argue that world building is really nothing new. But as a specific set of practices, world building sort of emerges with genre fiction, which is to say sci-fi and fantasy. And of course, whenever we talk about sci-fi and fantasy, who comes up but J.R.R. Tolkien, famous for The Lord of the Rings. One of the ur-texts for world building is a lecture by Tolkien called On Fairy Stories, in which Tolkien coins the term subcreation. So this is a really quick quote. He says, "The mental power of image making is one thing or aspect, and it should appropriately be called imagination. The achievement of the expression, which gives or seems to give the inner consistency of reality, is indeed another thing or aspect needing another name, art, the operative link between imagination and the final result, subcreation." Here, Tolkien's distinguishing between imagination, which is just the process of being able to imagine other places, and the capacity to give those places a sense of reality through detail, which he calls subcreation. But why sub? Why not just creation? And later in the essay, if you read it, you will note that he also uses the term secondary world to describe the worlds that people build. Why secondary? Why not constructed or just world? Turns out it's because Tolkien is a Catholic. So creation for him is reserved for God, and the primary world is the world that God created, the world that we live in. To illustrate this connection between his notion of world building and his faith a little more, I want to quote this poem. So this is apparently from a letter that he wrote in response to somebody who wrote to him claiming that fairy tales and fairy stories were lies. And I want to quote this poem partly because it's a really useful illustration of our point, and partly because I think it's just really extra to reply to what is essentially an anti-fan letter with a full poem. So here we go. "Dear sir," I said, "although now long estranged, man is not wholly lost nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keep the rags of lordship once he owned. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white, to many hues and endlessly combined, in living shapes that move from mind to mind. Though all the crannies of the world we filled, with elves and goblins though we dared to build, gods and their houses out of dark and light, and sowed the seed of dragons, 'twas our right. Used or misused, that right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we are made." So it's really great prose for a letter, but it also gives us a lot of insight into the way that Tolkien thinks. He clearly sees subcreation or world building as a right that's given specifically to humans because we were made in God's image, and it's a way to return to godliness. Because in a sense, when we do subcreation, we take the role of a god. So why do we care about Tolkien's worldview? In a sense, he's not wrong. If I create a world, I decide what happens in that world, right? Let's put a pin in this, but suffice it to say that Tolkien's method and his view of world building and the sort of structures for world building that he developed were foundational and inspirational to generations of people, as I'm sure most of us know, right? Now, let's look a little more recent. World building is becoming increasingly important these days. It's becoming a more and more popular way of thinking about media creation for everybody from your friendly neighborhood tabletop campaign all the way up to some of the biggest blockbuster franchises, which span, movies, television, video games, you name it, right? So a lot of people are thinking about it more and more. Some of those people are in a research group called the World Building Institute, which is based in the University of Southern California. And on their website, they provide us with a very clear definition of world building. World building designates a narrative practice in which the design of a world precedes the telling of a story. The richly detailed world becomes a container for narrative, producing stories that emerge logically and organically from its well-designed core. World building is founded on 3 beliefs, namely that storytelling is the most powerful system for the advancement of human capability, due to its ability to allow the human imagination to precede the realization of thought. That all stories emerge logically and intuitively from the worlds that create them. and that new technologies powerfully enable us to sculpt the imagination into existence. So we get a new angle here in contrast with Tolkien's understanding of world building, and that angle is systems thinking, which sort of sees the world building process and the worlds that people build as a sort of machine-like system. And our goal as world builders is to design that system to run well enough that it will do the narrative design work for you. If Tolkien's a sort of old-fashioned Catholic, I feel like the World Building Institute is sort of intelligent design, right? It's kind of the divine watchmaker analogy. But like Tolkien, the World Building Institute positions world builders as omnipotent creators, in this case, who use the help of new technologies, which I guess could mean anything from like computers to machine learning to AI, maybe? So with the help of these technologies, whatever they are, world builders can set in motion worlds that will create their own stories. But of course, at the center of it is always the designer, the world builder. Now, again, what's the problem here with this way of thinking, where you, the sort of omnipotent, omniscient creator, can create a consistent, well-designed, well-built world? Let's start from here. This is the basic premise that both Tolkien and the World Building Institute are operating from to some extent. I can know and understand everything about the world that I build. Now, this makes sense on the face of it. You're the creator of the world. You're its designer. So, of course, you should be able to know the most about it. From there, you start building your world with the goal of knowing and understanding everything about it. Now, I want to be clear here. We all know that it's not feasible to sort of develop every detail about the world we build because we just don't have enough time. It's not possible to come up with all of those details, but we approach the world building process with the assumption that it's theoretically possible and that we, as the sort of omnipotent creators of our world, we know the most about our worlds. We know them best. And that if we were given enough time, maybe we could know everything about them. And from there, that's when we start to use world building methods that give us what we see as the most accurate picture of our world. We make maps that are geographically accurate. We make timelines that we believe tell us the truth of the history of our world. And we make world Bibles, as many people call them, that comprehensively describe every detail of our world, from its economics to its politics, its art, design, architecture, and on and on and on. We fill in every detail that we can. Now, even if you don't follow Tolkien, if you're not a Tolkien fan, and certainly not if you're a fan of the World Building Institute, you still absorb this way of thinking because so many guides to world building are based on the premise of building up these world Bibles that are full of logically consistent information to help you understand your world the best. And here's the problem with this. You're not a god. There's no way for you alone to understand a whole world. We don't even understand our world. Worlds don't make sense. Worlds aren't consistent. There's no way that one person could even begin to understand everything about a world. It's 2020. I feel like we should all know this by now, that worlds are not things that we can just understand. So when we build worlds with this sort of goal of consistency and completeness and knowledge and understanding from the perspective of us, the omnipotent creators, we build worlds that end up flat and uninteresting because these worlds are knowable in a way that our world, that the most vivid worlds really aren't. So this is partly an issue of bias, but not entirely, right? Of course, we all go into the world building process with assumptions, with ideas and issues we care more about, with certain perspectives based on who we are and in what circumstances we grew up, and certain things we understand more and less, right? But it's not entirely an issue of bias, because the solution isn't just to be aware of your biases and do research. It's a little more complicated than that. It has to do with the way that we position ourselves in relation to our world. And so I think one solution is to begin from a different premise, which is the premise that you can't know or understand everything about your world. There's no way. So once you start from that premise, once you release yourself from the obligations of omnipotence, then you can start the world building process, assuming that there are things that you don't know and understand. You can start with the goal of building uncertainty into your world instead of trying to fill it in. And you can see blank spaces as necessary and interesting components instead of oversights. And once you start from that vantage point, then instead of aiming for accuracy and completeness, you can approach the design process differently, with the goal of showing specific perspectives on your world, but leaving questions unanswered, ideas unfinished, and questions of consistency up to your audience to think through. Now, what does this look like practically? So we have maps, timelines, and instead of world Bibles, we have world notes here as an example. There's all kinds of other organizational and logistical work that you can do, but hopefully this is a little bit of a framework that you can extrapolate from. So let's start with maps. And why don't we start with shedding the idea of geographical accuracy in map making? Imagine what a map for your world could look like if you try to make it accurate to something else instead of geography. Maybe you make it accurate to the emotional experience or the perspective of a specific person, or to the political and social goals of a place or a group. So draw maps as if they exist in your world. And then you can start asking questions like, who made them? Why? What did they leave out and why? Timelines also, when you start to think about them from the perspective of your world, can become a lot more interesting. So instead of making just a single timeline that tells you the facts of what happened in your world, you can come up with multiple timelines. You can make contradicting histories, and you can decide that you, as the creator of this world, don't know which one was correct because the people in your world now don't know. You can ask what's been forgotten, what's been misremembered, why, and what do these different histories tell people about what it's like to live in your world now. So world notes. This could mean anything from an encyclopedia, a bestiary, like I said, a wiki. Ask yourself, who collects this information in your world and why? Who enables this collection? So if your world uses money or has jobs, whose job is it to do this and how are they paid, right? Who reads this collection? Who is meant to read the collection and why? What is not collected? Who is not intended as a reader? You know, the process of collecting information about people and about society in our world is so fraught politically, right? So what's it like in your world, and why is some information available and other information not available? Overall, instead of trying to fill every space, leave blank spaces, make multiple versions and don't decide which one is real, speculate but don't confirm, and ask why and how things are known in your world, except that you might not know the answer beyond what people in your world know today. Now, whenever I can, I prefer a collaborative world building approach over an individual one. You get a lot of different perspectives on your world, and you have to confront the idea of your own subjectivity through the process of world building itself. But common and popular collaborative world building approaches emphasize creating consensus, which I think erases the most interesting aspect of collaborative world building, which is having to deal with contradictions. So I have a few quick recommendations if you are doing a world building project collaboratively. For example, if you're designing a game together or whatever. Don't try to erase your multiple perspectives, but allow for them instead. Take a yes and approach, like from improv. So instead of denying people's ideas or shutting them down, always accept them, even if it leads to confusion, especially if it leads to chaos. Take contradictions seriously. Ask why they happened, expand on them, and then build them into your world. Maybe these kinds of contradictions and questions and chaos exist for the people in your world as well. The problem is, at the same time as you can accommodate different perspectives in the world building process, you do have to have a certain shared understanding of your world, or it just becomes several different worlds instead of one, right? So this tension between allowing for contradiction and creating a shared imaginative space, this is what really interests me as a game designer and what motivates my own world building game projects. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of projects that I've worked on and how I've leveraged that kind of tension to create more interesting opportunities for world building. 1 Hour World Builders is a 4-player cooperative game in which you and your friends collaboratively build a world together in under an hour using a structured system of questioning and an innovative set of prompts. My big goal with this project was to move away from the thing that a lot of people do when they start their world building projects, where they ask themselves, am I building a fantasy world or am I building a sci-fi world? And that's where they start from. I think that when you do this, you end up with a ton of baggage that you don't intend to bring with you. Instead, in 1 Hour World Builders, I have people start worlds from themes. So I'm going to read this one theme card out. There's a few different theme cards you can get in the game that you draw at the beginning and you talk about. Describe an argument you've had with someone older than you, a parent, grandparent, older relative, or friend. What would this argument look like on the scale of your world? Who are the two sides? Who's in power? Whose position is the most popular? How did this argument begin? Has it been resolved? If so, how? And if not, why not? Now, of course, this is like a fun icebreaker on the one hand, where you get to know your friends better by hearing a story about their life. But also, this creates a framework to understand the very beginnings of a world. You have a very basic power structure. You have a sort of core problem that all of your other questions and answers can sort of think about and move out from. Aside from the sort of genre question, in 1 Hour World Builders, I wanted to make players incorporate each other's ideas instead of disallowing them. So players build on each other's responses through this sort of system of questioning. So you can't deny an idea that somebody brings in, and you can even use questions to sort of cleverly add your own twist to the answers that people have given. But it's always about building on top of ideas that people have made. And the prompts try to emphasize contradictions, historiography, misunderstandings, confusion. You can actually play 1 Hour World Builders online. The URL is here. It's onehourworld.builders. You can play it with your friends and over the internet remotely. Additionally, I actually printed a 100-copy run of this game shortly before the pandemic. So I have about 70 copies sitting in my closet. If you want to buy one and you are located in Toronto, please send me a message. I would love to sell you a copy and deliver it to your house. So that was the sort of first project that I did, the first world building game project I worked on. And the next one, which is coming soon in January, is called WorldBot. WorldBot was commissioned for an online residency called Remote Realities, which was hosted by Dames Making Games and Trinity Square Video. The premise is that WorldBot is a Discord bot who guides participants to create a world to add to its sort of archive collection of worlds. And players can create a world over a set period of time, anywhere from an evening to about a month. WorldBot is 1 part world-building game and 1 part bluffing game. The way it works is that players are given prompts, some of which they negotiate together, and some of which they submit to WorldBot as secrets individually. And sometimes WorldBot will reveal a secret, and the players have to guess who wrote it. And if they're correct, the player who wrote the secret gets penalized, but WorldBot reveals another secret, and so people learn more about the world. So everybody is incentivized to try to figure out who wrote the secret, but at the same time, the person who is writing a secret has to incorporate the ideas of the other players in order to stay hidden, so it seems like it's not them. So through the sort of process of bluffing and secrets, WorldBot encourages people to incorporate each other's ideas into the process. Now, Remote Realities is currently exhibiting a world from WorldBot's archives, which was produced during a playtest in which I made a sort of digital art world for. So you can view that if you search Remote Realities, or I can provide a link. And WorldBot itself is going to be available January 2021. Now, if you're interested in any of this stuff, or if you'd like to hear about some of my other world building projects, like I'm thinking about right now in the very early stages of making a world building tarot deck, because of course, as a queer person, I'm contractually obligated to make at least one. You can follow me on Substack. My Substack is kaylin.substack.com. I'm going to put out a sort of monthly newsletter, and in addition to hearing about my projects, I also want to put in sort of monthly tips and prompts and ideas for your own world building process. So if that sounds like something that would interest you, I really hope you can follow me. With that, I want to return to what we said at the beginning, which is that the way that we think about world building and the way that we do world building impacts the worlds that we build. And I'm hoping that if we can start to think about the world building process differently, if we can shed this idea that we need to be omnipotent rulers of the worlds that we create, and start to understand these worlds as fundamentally chaotic and unknowable and surprising and inconsistent. Maybe if we start to think this way, we can start to build better worlds together. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you again to Wordplay for hosting me.
I can't do this anymore. Nothing I can do to change your mind.
Now you are welcome to try.
I believe I made myself clear.
You know, I feel like we've had this conversation a couple of times now, and you still don't seem to get that I'm done with this line is just gonna look really silly at the end of the day.
Wow, this tastes like a wonderful winter day where you step out on your porch and smell the aghast snow and pine train tracks.
Hi, my name is Sharang Biswas, and I'm a game designer, writer, and artist. And before I start, I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank Hand-Eye Society. I want to thank everyone who's, giving me the gift of their attention. I hope you're having a good conference. I'm going to talk about the power of solo analog role-playing games today. So first, a bit about me. Like I said, I'm an artist, writer, and game designer. At the top, you can see some of the art institutions I've worked with and shown work at. I've taught at a number of different universities and civil institutions. I've written for magazines. And at the bottom, I've won Indiecade and IGDN awards, and I wanted to put the Nebula there because I was shortlisted for a Nebula for a solo indie RPG, right? I wasn't nominated or even won, but it is relevant, so I thought I'd put it there. Why not? I used to be an engineer. I studied biomedical engineering before I decided, nah, and I went to grad school for interactive art, and now I do this kind of thing, where I do a lot of interactive theater, performance, analog games, that kind of stuff. I've worked a lot with board games. So on the left is the board game I've made, on the right a board game I worked for. A bunch of my work is independent, weird, small role-playing games. I've had some bigger clients. I made the Dark Crystal LARP with my design partner Nick O'Leary for the Museum of the Moving Image in conjunction with the Jim Henson Foundation. I recently worked with Dungeons and Dragons to help design and write for Dungeons and Dragons Live, which happened this summer, their big online event that happened this summer. And of course, I also write a lot about games in general, about their place in culture, their place in society, how they interact with each other, things like that. But today's topic is about solo analog role-playing games. So now, if in the last 2 decades video games have become more mainstream, it's in the last few years that tabletop games have really exploded, right? We can see magazines all over the world are writing about, the rise of board games, D&D's rising and stuff, right? They talk about millennials are craving connection and craving physical social experiences and things like that. And just as we hit this area where games like Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games are becoming so popular, we hit COVID. Right? And sure, this isolation means a lot of people are turning to video games and these solitary activities, but a lot of analog games people still want their outlet. Now, of course, people can play analog role-playing games over Skype and Zoom and all those different tools, but solo RPGs have been seeing a rise. Now, it's not just because of COVID, right? The indie RPG scene has been quietly embracing solo RPGs for a while now, right? But I think that COVID has brought these to the forefront more. And you can partially see that recently. So, for example, Wait For Me is a Kickstarter that Jian Shim and Kevin Pulp made that funded in the first 40 minutes and then proceeded to, over the course of its run, fund 4,000% its initial goal, right? Again, this is a solo journaling game, right? 1,000-Year-Old Vampire by Tim Hutchinson swept the Ennies, which, if you don't know, are one of the major awards for tabletop role-playing games, and then won a major award at Indiecade, the International Festival of Independent Games, which is, a major festival for games in general. And then Verger, which I hinted at earlier, Verger was on the shortlist for the inaugural games category, game writing category for the Nebula Awards, which is, Science Fiction Arts of America's big speculative fiction award, has been featured in 2 different gallery shows, one at IGDN, all kinds, right? So these solo RPGs have been garnering increased prominence. And why not? They're very interesting. So just in case you don't know, the structure of a solo RPG tends to be like a written prompt, usually a static text. I have rarely encountered a digital text that changes, but usually static text that prompts you. So if you look here, if you look at the top right, you'll see a mortal flees with you. What name do you adopt among these strangers, right? So the text will ask you questions, will provide you with prompts, and expect you to fill in the gaps, right? This is different from those game books you might remember from the 80s and stuff. They're still there, but those are very popular then, or we think about those being very popular then, which would say, if you choose the door on the left, turn to page 75, and if you jump down the manhole, turn to page 83, right? Those provide you with both the choices and the consequences. These solo RPGs leave a large part of the script unwritten, and you as the player create that and explore that yourself. Right? Now, some of these games also employ more complex mechanics, right? This is an excerpt from 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, uses dice to do certain things. It also uses resources. It tells you, note down that you have this resource, note down that you don't have this resource, etc., etc. And some of them ask you to do a little weirder, things that are a little bit weirder, and we'll talk about that in a bit, right? Now, these solo RPGs are really interesting. They have a lot of interesting features tied to them. For one, they lie at the sort of weird intersection of all these different forms, right? They're sort of like a tabletop role-playing game because you're doing a shared creation of a story, you in conversation, not with a live person, but with the author who wrote you these prompts. They're sort of like the solitary act of just writing, of taking writing prompts and writing, because you're alone, you're writing or creating the story, no one's there to judge you. They're kind of like game books because you're going on this journey with decisions and consequences. Only the consequences and sometimes even the decisions might not actually be provided. They might only be hinted at. And they're like basic prose sometimes because many of these games are admired for the evocative, the rich, the poetic language that goes into them, right? So solo analog RPGs lie at this like weird intersection that's not been fully explored or defined yet. But they are still very, very interesting, right? Now, we can say, as Walker Gibson does here, that, quote, every time we open the pages of another piece of writing, we are embarked on a new adventure in which we become a new person, end quote, right? So Gibson likens every act of reading to role play. You're always, in some sense, taking on this character, looking through the eyes of this character in some ways, right? But that's not entirely satisfying, right? If we want to actually play a game and we want to role play, we want the decision-making aspect of a game, right? Not just reading a book where the decision isn't there. And not everyone just wants to sit and tell a story from scratch or write a story from scratch, right? People who want this sort of experience want to sort of mix, right? They want the authorial voice. There's definitely something to be said about clever imaginative authors providing you with the kernel of a story, but they also want your own input in some ways. Now, single-player computer games do offer this, right? There's authorial voice and you're putting your own input, but while that skews more towards authorial, the analog solo games skew more towards this crew, where you are given more to create and the author's role is less. It's all about what kind of balance you want. And skewing towards this side of the balance, the solo analog RPG balance, has a lot of interesting, cool things going for it, right? So here's Espen Arseth, and he's talking about non-linear text. Non-linear text like hypertext, where, Twine game, you click on text, you're all familiar with Twine games, right? We're at Wordplay Festival, where you click on words and go to different parts of the text, similar to, the game books in the 80s, right? And he says, when we look at the whole of a non-linear text, we cannot read it. And when we read it, we cannot see the whole text. The text, far from yielding its riches to our critical gaze, appears to seduce us, but it remains immaculate, recedes, and we are left with our partial and impure thoughts, like unworthy pilgrims beseeching an absent deity, right? So Arseth is waxing lyrical about the power of these non-linear texts, that we can't see the whole thing, but if we see the whole thing, it's not a full text. If we see the whole script, it's not a full text. So what is this interesting entity that arrives, right? And I wonder, what are his thoughts? I mean, he's still alive. Someone could ask him, but what happens when you have the text that's incomplete? Not only is it this thing where you can traverse different parts to access all of it, these texts, you cannot access the whole script because you as a player have to create part of it, right? The complete script is incomplete. It exists in this sort of psychic space that's shared by many people who are almost, looking into it through different kaleidoscopic lenses to see a different version, their own version of the story that they have input in, right? By twiddling the knobs of the kaleidoscope, i.e. by answering the prompts and adding to it themselves, right? And here I have a quote where Marcus Montola is talking about LARP. He talks about the LARPer as the primary audience of her own performance, and the diegesis she builds as her primary object of appreciation, right? So in LARP, live action role-playing games, Montola is saying you are observing yourself in a way, creating this story and then experiencing this story. Sarah Lynn Bowman talks about this as the first-person audience, right? And these solo analog role-playing games are the same, except for without others around you to help you with this LARP, right? There's no co-creation in real time. There's co-creation with the text, right? You're still a sort of, I've written about this before, first-person scholar, you're a sort of, quote, reflexive transceiver of theme, at once creating meaning, consuming that meaning, and then observing yourself consume that meaning, end quote. What's happening with these texts is really interesting because you are writing, you're watching yourself write, you're consuming the writing that you have written. Again, in conjunction with these prompts, this authorial voice. And in a sense, these games can be thought of as sort of speculative fiction. And I'm using that word particularly because I don't mean speculative fiction as we use that term, which is, rethinking societal and technological conventions in the way that sci-fi and fantasy do, but in that they force you to speculate, right? It's still like sci-fi and fantasy is lauded for making you think about what would happen in the world if this. In some sense, you can say this sort of game makes you do the same thing because the author provides you a question and then does not answer it in any way, right? You have to answer it, right? The what if and how about questions that are very popular in spawning, legions of fan fiction here are made explicit in the text. You can even think of it as writing your own fan fiction, as in prompts to write your own fan fiction, perhaps, right? Apart from the fan aspect, right? And you enter this sort of reflexive interactivity where you're interacting with yourself, sort of, in this weird way, right? And then that's really interesting, and I think a lot more research should be going into this. Artists and scholars, I do not identify as a scholar, artists and scholars should be looking into this more, studying what is the effect of these single-player analog role-playing games, and what are they doing for culture, what are they doing for games, for writing, etc. But now I want to give some examples of some really interesting work that have come out recently that I'm familiar with. There's a lot out there, especially with the whole lyric game movement that you might be familiar with in the indie RPG world. But I'm going to focus on a few. So first of all, there's a game called The Beast by Naked Female Giant, is the game company that makes it. It's a set of cards with prompts that you play over 21 days and journal in your diary, right? So every day you pick a card. Essentially, there might be some more slight mechanics I don't remember, but every day you answer a journal prompt according to a card, right? Now, at first glance, okay, it's, basic prompts. But if you look at the card here, right, the question is, how do you make the beast orgasm? In what way is this dangerous to your health and life? So this is a game about you having sex with like a monster under your bed, right, that you play over this long time. And this game taps into our very dark desires and senses, right? It taps into the lurid secret desires we don't like to talk about or might not even want to think about. And it lets you do this in a way, it lets you explore kinky roleplay and desires without anyone else present. You get to do it with yourself and this author who has provided you with this outlet, with this gate to do this, which I think is really interesting and cool use of this medium. Then this is a game I wrote called You Will Be Liquid. It combines choices and prompts, so every page has a prompt. So it's about wandering through a gay club with your friend. So here, everyone is smoke. Under neon they blur. Dawn might disperse them like wisps in a breeze, but right now their energy howls. Lathe has wafted away, but you are energetic and Aeolian. When did you know you were into Lathe? So that's a prompt that you have to imagine the answer. And then, do your feelings normally make you giddy or melancholy? So that's a leading question. That's a choice that you make. That is it. So that while the first prompt is there to give you creativity, the second prompt is there to guide you down a certain emotional arc that the designer, i.e. me, wants to guide you through, right? And then this game, I know this sounds like a flex, but people have told me that they like the writing style of this game a lot. So this game uses poetic language as part of its to enforce its tone, right? And the other thing it does is this game I made this in conjunction with Adam Vass. He designed this format where it's like a foldable, unfoldable map that you sort of follow. It's like a physical map that you can see it folded up there that you then follow and then trace your path through this gay club, right? So I tried to use Adam Vass's formula of using spatiality in a bit to enhance this experience with a single-player role-playing game. Then I talked about 1,000 Year Vampire briefly already. It is Tim Hutchinson's game where you are playing a vampire over thousands of years. And there's a lot going on with it, right? There's lots of cool things with like choices, with resources and things, but what I really find really intriguing about this game is this idea of memory, because you're this vampire who lives thousands of years and you cannot remember everything, but you have this diary. So as you play the game, you can write down memories to recommend what's in your brain. But as you play more, you are then forced to remove some of those memories. You forget those memories, and you might be able to start a diary and write those memories down, but then you might lose the diary, and so you lost. So you might, for example, forget. You might have a memory. You might create a memory of how you became a vampire, and then you might create a memory of how you then killed your lover, and then you might forget the memory of killing your lover. And then later on, hundreds of years later, you might be like, I had a lover once. I wonder what happened to him. But then you've forgotten that you killed him. As in you, the character, has forgotten who killed him because you erased that memory, but you, the player, has not. And so you are playing this weird game where you're aware. It's very tragic because the game is all about tragedy. It's about vampires. Vampires are tragic beings, right? Well, in some kinds of fiction. If you read Twilight, they're different. But in here, it forces tragedy on you because you know you have the sweet memory, but your character didn't anymore. And so keeping these two simultaneously in your head is like really cool. And the game does a really interesting thing about playing with like memory and recollection and emotion tied to memory. Then there's Anna Anthropy's Tavern at the End of the World. It's part of a series of games that she made that use the same base mechanic of dice and tarot cards. But I really like this one because it does a really interesting thing. I mean, I also like this because Anna thanks me for inspiring her title, which is kind of cool. But apart from that, this game is really interesting because in here you own a tavern in this occupied like city where there's a colonizing force that occupies it, except that a lot of revolutionaries come to your tavern to meet, and every time you answer a prompt, you have to sort of, the game tells you to answer it in code. So you're writing down in your journal or whatever the prompts, but you're writing what, like, let's say you imagine that two revolutionaries come and talk about assassinating the king. When you write that down, you might say, oh, there were these two fine young men of a gentle persuasion, because you know that gentle persuasion means they're revolutionaries, that are talking about slaughtering a pig, because you know that that's code for killing the king, right? So you are writing that down. So you are basically writing a code from yourself, because you are a single player game. Again, you are simultaneously the antagonist, the protagonist, everyone else, right? That's really cool. You're like deceiving yourself in some way. And it's really funny because if you look at this game later, you might not remember all the choices you made. You're reading this code and you might not be able to decipher it yourself. You're like, oh, what did that mean? And so the revolution was successful, perhaps, right? The authorities, you, never found out what the revolution was planning, right? It's a cool bit of play happening in this imaginative world, right? That's kind of cool. And then some games try and break free from the verbs of writing down and reading, right? So I designed Verger, which is a game that you play alone in an empty kitchen while making salad. Okay, it's a game about witchcraft and revenge. It prompts you to answer questions about punishing others and the collateral damage to that, but you do it while prepping the salad. And I try to make the acts you're doing, like chopping the vegetables and squeezing the lemon and things like that. I try and marry the verb you are doing to the part of the story you are then narrating, right? Like here I have, as you chop, think about your childhood, let the herbs sing a tale of your youth, things like that, right? And then, much like the memories of your childhood, the herbs are now fragmented, small, difficult to recognize. This game tries to use physicality and the rest of your senses, because you smell, you taste at the end, and you bring in those senses to this analog game experience. So that was a few examples. There are many examples, like I said, right now. If you look on itch.io, there's a thriving set of analog single-player role-playing games if you're interested. And I think, again, these do deserve more scrutiny and more study, right? As lovers of text-based art, we should be paying attention to them. This is almost becoming a new genre of games, of literature, of hypertext. I don't even know what. It's a new genre unto itself. And a single-player analog role-playing games deserve a lot of attention. Thank you so much. Like I said, my name is Sharang Biswas. That is my Twitter at Sharang Biswas. That's my website. I also am doing a Kickstarter right now. You can support it right now. Yes, during this festival, even though I recorded this way before the festival, the Kickstarter is still up. It is a Kickstarter of erotic themed or sex themed interactive fiction called Strange Lusts, Strange Loves. I put a link there. We're bringing together lots of award-winning writers like Natalia Theodoridou, and we have Anna Anthropy, we have Nivedita Sen, we have Cleo Davis, myself. We're making an anthology of games that provide a nuanced perspective of sex, but in an interactive way. So if you're interested in interactive fiction, which I'm guessing most of you are at this conference, do check it out. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your conference. Keep supporting indie artists. Now more than ever, they need your support. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Oh.
Nothing I can do to change your mind.
Well, you are welcome to try.
I believe I made myself clear.
You know, I feel like we've had this conversation a couple of times now, and you still don't seem to get that I'm done with this line is just gonna look really silly at the end of the day.
Wow, this tastes like a wonderful winter day where you step out on your porch and smell the aghast snow and pine train tracks.
Hi everyone! Thank you so much for taking the time to tune into my wordplay talk, 40K Slow Burn Rivals to Lovers, Why You Should Hire Fanfiction Authors to Write Your Game. I'm Kinsey Erickson, I use she, her pronouns, and I am a full stack developer at Resilient Games Studio. I'm also an associate producer for Code Coven, and I love to write. I've been writing ever since I was very young, and nowadays I write for games, I journal, I write poetry, and of course I write fanfiction, as you might have guessed from the title of this talk. Over the years, I recognize a lot of similarities in the process of writing fanfiction and for writing games. And so I'm going to be talking about that today, as well as first defining fanfiction and exploring how we do and don't label works as fanfictions or adaptations and the connotations that happen with those lines being drawn, as well as talking about why you should hire fanfiction authors to write your game. So, what is fanfiction? Oxford Languages, aka the definition you get when you Google what is fanfiction, defines fanfiction as fiction written by a fan of and featuring characters from a particular TV series, movie, etc. I personally define it as a little less specific than that. So I would define it as a piece of mostly text-based fiction that directly and intentionally builds upon, remixes, or refers to an existing piece of media. I definitely broaden it out a bit. Perhaps a more medium would be the definition of the Organization for Transformative Works, OTWs, Archive of Our Own creators, Archive of Our Own being a very prominent website that hosts fan fiction and other transformative fan works. They define it right there in the middle as fan fiction, the acknowledged or obvious borrowing of story elements to tell a new story in the fan fiction writer's words. So there's kind of a lot of ambiguity there as well, but the reason that they define it juxtaposed by plagiarism and also quotation is because the Archive of Our Own, AO3, is specifically a website that is meant to protect their fanfiction creators from being sued by IPs, essentially, who don't want their work appearing in anything that isn't licensed by them. Which to me is kind of funny because I don't really think, a short story about Bucky Barnes and Captain America going back in time and retiring to a farm is really going to undercut Marvel's profits, but they might think it does. And so, because of AO3's work, the person who might write that story is protected from being legally pursued. So, going back to talking a bit more about fanfiction, fanfiction isn't just something that only a few people make and engage with. There's quite a bit of it out there, and there's a lot of kinds of it. So several prominent types of fan fiction are genfic, which is short for general fic or general interest fic, and is very broad in category, but typically doesn't focus on romance. So these are all sorts of things like alternate endings to media. What if this happened in a totally new universe? It could really be anything, but again, isn't focused on romance so much. There's also reader insert fiction, which is exactly what it sounds like. You, the reader, play a main role in this fiction, so you either get named or never really referred to by your name, and it's often written in second person. And the third type, probably the type you might have heard about, is shipfic. So ship is short for relationship, and it's most often about two or more characters in a universe falling in love or exploring a relationship that they're already in, or exploring a different dynamic of their relationship. Within each of those three types, there are essentially every literary genre and style. It's not all even romance novel-esque, even shipfic like that. You'll find mystery things, you'll find adventure-based stories, horror stories, all genres. And another fun fact, a lot of our categories and tropes and language for fan fiction actually all comes from one fandom, which is Star Trek, back in the 1970s especially. A lot of the foundational work for how we consider and talk about fan fiction nowadays was created by all the people there who were writing about Star Trek, which is pretty fun. And some more stats about fan fiction. Again, it's more popular than you think. As of May 2020, here are some stats provided by Archive of Our Own themselves. So they currently at the time, they had 2.5 million registered users, and you don't have to register to read fanfiction on their website, which is an important distinction. They had over 6 million works being hosted on their site, and as of the end of April 2020, they hit 340 million total page views, which is truly an absurd amount of views. And this is all only from one fanfiction hosting site. There are plenty of others. Fanfiction.net is a very popular one. Wattpad hosts a lot of fanfic. Many people write and share it to live journals, and all other sorts of forum websites, Tumblr, pretty much any place where you can host written word, people probably snuck fanfiction onto. And here is a graph of AO3's statistics, again, from that May 2020 look. It's a little hard to see just because the data points are so small, but this is showing site traffic in terms of million page views per week, and it's from the very beginning of the website. Actually, that's not true. I think the website was founded a bit before, but it's from 2012 onward. And again, it's color coded and hard to see, but actually every year chronologically just increases. So the very bottom line is 2012, and each line of dots going up is the next year. And so you can actually see 2020 plotted there is both significantly higher than the rest and features a very sharp increase of viewage in March when a lot of people began staying at home and reading fanfiction a lot more. Which, is a fun little fact. But even all that being said, even if you had never encountered the word fanfiction before and you've never heard any of these words that I've been talking about, you're actually already familiar with fanfiction. I can guarantee you that. And in fact, you probably love some fanfictions and you just don't know it. So again, if we're going back to those definitions of fanfiction being it either very obviously or intentionally borrows from an existing piece of media, some pieces of fanfiction include The Lion King, which, as you know, is a fanfiction of Hamlet and debatably Kimba the White Lion. And as you absolutely know, Hamlet is a fanfiction of the oral story of Amleth that was recorded by Danish author and historian Saxo Grammaticus. Obviously. Other examples would be the entire Halo novel series, which I believe is well over 20 books, the entire expanded universe of the Marvel comics and movies, 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight, with 50 Shades of Grey being a fanfiction of Twilight, and Lord of the Rings and literally all high fantasy that's been published after it, from video games to books to movies. If it's got dwarves and hobbits and elves, it's very likely drawing from Lord of the Rings, whether or not it knows it. And truly just the concept of adaptation and humanity's desire to share beloved stories of triumphs and teach morals as a form of entertainment and community building and teaching is all, in a sense, fan fiction, because our original tropes and things like that were all created as a way of communicating things that we noticed in a society. You know, you have these stock characters in classic plays and things like that. And I'm not trying to say that everything is fan fiction. There are no original concepts anymore, and that we should throw out this idea of being able to own a work or claim a work, and that people can steal things wherever they like. But what I am saying is we have always taken things that we see around us and built upon them. In fact, that's what a lot of people might even define as being an artist, is looking at something and recreating it in your own way, in your own form. And there's a personal favorite quote of mine about that is by the poet Mary Oliver. She said, instructions for living life: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And that's writing, that's painting, that's artistic creation, is telling about something that you've seen. And so the fact of the matter is, fan fiction is already embedded in our art, but it's only seen as legitimate or impressive or as a work of its own in certain cases. And in those cases, we don't call it fan fiction, we call it a remake, or we call it an adaptation or a continuation of something. And yet, when we go back to our definitions of fan fiction, again, refers to something intentionally or very obviously, builds upon something, remixes something. Remakes and adaptations fit those criteria. They are fan fictions. They are fan works of something that existed. And so, why do we label certain things as fan fiction and other things as not? Why are these works lauded as being incredible, impressive, original pieces when other things that might have as much level of detail and time went into them are cringeworthy or are childish or are for practice or fun and not given the same kind of legitimacy? So we're going to dive into talking about that. So the first of many possible reasons as to why fan fiction is rarely talked about or rarely talked about seriously is copyright concerns. So copyright law is definitely confusing. The line between whether something is allowed or could get you sued is certainly a blurry one. And by labeling something as fan fiction, then there's a certain level of distancing that occurs between the work and copyright that can protect the fan fiction author, since it's the work of a serious. So don't go suing them for what you would have imagined if a character made a different decision in the finale of your show. But by making these arguments, these fanfiction works are delegitimized. It's not quality of enough of a work for someone with copyright to be concerned because this isn't going to take money away from them, or it couldn't even if they wanted it to. The skill and the time of the author are erased. But if fanfiction authors are to try and stand by their work and ask for money or donations from their readers, or even recontextualize it in an attempt to gain that recognition and be able to profit from it without it being published in the IP officially, that could really backfire on them. So if you think back to that list of popular fan fiction, one of them actually might have jumped out to you as having an issue in this very sense. It is 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight. And so, for sure, when 50 Shades of Grey was first published, amongst the many things that people were saying about the book, there was a push because the book was discovered to have originally been published as a Twilight fan fiction, and there were a lot of critiques about it that happened because people were upset that something, as illegitimate as Twilight fan fiction was now making money, and a lot of this was wrapped under concern that Stephanie Meyer was losing money. So to which, in response to that, I would point you to the fact that Stephanie Meyer is like a millionaire, and her books kept selling very well after 50 Shades of Grey was published. She went on the record to say that she doesn't care about 50 Shades of Grey having started as a fan fiction, or I say started, but it still is, and that it doesn't bother her that 50 Shades of Grey is doing well. And again, if you compare even the audiences between those books, the idea that that 50 Shades of Grey was hurting Twilight doesn't really check out because they have pretty different intended audiences, with Twilight being for young adults, young adult girls, and for 50 Shades of Grey being for older women. So there's very little overlap between those except for their gender. So rather than 50 Shades of Grey being seen as an adaptation or an inspired by piece or all of these other works that we see, especially again, think Lord of the Rings, with all of the works that really shamelessly take world building from those books and don't even recognize it necessarily. Um, 50 Shades of Grey was being critiqued as intellectual theft, and this was treated as a very serious issue. And I definitely want to put a quick interlude in here to say that there is plenty to critique about both of these books, such as the racism that is very problematic in both of these books, and there's a lot of it, as well as this unchecked glorification of abusive relationships that both of them really prominently feature as romantic. And these critiques definitely did happen for both of these books, but weren't the main point in a lot of discussion about them or in the ways that they were kind of disparaged. And so all of that is to say, the concern for copyright that happened for 50 Shades of Grey was really pushed against a piece of fan fiction that had this huge reputation as being something that was made for women to enjoy, and it was based off of something that was meant for girls to enjoy. And so that all kind of brings me to my next point about why fan fiction may not be taken seriously, which is that it is by and large written for and by gender minorities and queer people. Um, so here shows some data from a 2013 user census of people who used AO3, and there are 10,000 users. Again, this data is pretty, it's not extremely relevant as it was in 2013, but it's the most recent data I could find. And as you can see, it breaks down the self-reported user genders and sexualities, and it is very, by and large, gender minorities and or queer people. And so, again, if you return to many of those fan fictions that we take seriously and applaud, Star Wars, comic books, Halo, you'll notice that a lot of them were made by, or originally, or even in the fan fiction, were made by men or made by straight women. And that's obviously just how a lot of art is treated. You hopefully don't need me to tell you about the huge, obstacles that queer creators and marginalized genders face when creating art. And especially when that art is about their experiences and are meant for people like them to engage with. So when it comes to fanfiction, something that again is by and large made so that the author enjoyed something and wanted to make more of it, whatever that piece of media is. Um, of course, of course their work isn't going to be taken seriously, no matter the amount of time and research and talent that went into creating it, and regardless of whether or not that author wrote that piece to even, push themselves artistically, or they wrote that to create their best work of art yet. The fact of the matter is that they were writing and creating things, but they already weren't taken seriously and they already weren't validated. And the last reason as to why fanfiction may not be taken seriously or seen as legitimate is that it can't be immediately monetized, and so capitalism has deemed it to be worthless. The games industry and capitalism at large really is all about personal projects and passion, because of the hustle, because of this idea that you're always working to be making the best thing, growing yourself, making things to sell and gain profit. But creating works without that motivation or expectation of pay doesn't fit into the narrative of always grinding. And that's what a lot of fanfiction generation is. There's no end product to profit off of without extensive reshaping and resources. And again, that A comes at the risk of losing legitimacy still as being seen as originally a fanfiction. And it's also worth noting that a lot of the resources needed to potentially deal with a legal battle or recontextualize and differentiate something and get published and things like that are resources that are inaccessible to marginalized creators. So that means, as you might imagine, the next stop in this talk about convincing you to hire fanfiction authors is the part where I convince you to hire fanfiction authors to write your game. So point number one of why you should go ahead and do that is that many fanfiction authors have a dedication to details, characters, and lore, no matter how vast the original content may be. Maybe you already have a franchise with 3 existing titles in it, and you have a deeply disorganized internal Wikipedia that is always driving you mad, and you have fans who will be horribly upset if you have any sort of inconsistency in your story, and you need someone to learn all of what you've got currently quickly for a temp job or a deadline. Fanfiction authors make entire character style guides full of every line that a character has ever said for fun and for personal satisfaction or as a writing challenge. They'll go deep, deep into their original content to make sure that the characters that they're writing sound authentic to the original piece. And alternate universe fan fictions, where it's Star Wars but they're in high school, often involve weeks of careful consideration of each aspect of the original source material and how to carefully adapt them to this new context while still keeping that essence and kind of the meat of what originally made it what it is. So this is definitely a great skill for any sequel game, for spin-off games, for games contract work, perhaps to make a side-by-side game to another type of media. Many fanfiction authors do what they do because they're really a big fan, again, of that original source material, and they want to expand upon it or explore different stories. And so continuing to kind of reinvent that in a satisfying way is the name of the game for a fanfiction and for many of these existing game projects. Another reason why to hire fanfiction authors is that they have a strong sense of the aspects of characters, plots, and world building that fans love and want to engage with. These authors are really great at honing in on the favorite parts of a material in the fandom's eyes, and then making more of that for people to consume and enjoy. So if you're definitely looking to make a new story that will have your players engaged or really enjoy what's going on, fanfiction authors will help you find the ingredients in the recipe for that and what you've already got going, and help you highlight that even more. If you remember that category of fanfiction that is reader insert fanfiction, there's a whole bunch of authors out there who have a lot of experience writing fiction that features a main character that is not too specific of a character, such that either a specific audience of people or even all readers can identify with them. And feel satisfied seeing the actions and words that that character says, and feel like they have agency in the story through that character. Uh, you may have noticed this sounds very similar to a lot of concerns with games writing of wanting your main character to not be bland and not be boring and have their actions make sense, but also be able to be approached by whoever your target audience is and have that level of familiarity there. And there's also a subgenre of reader insert fic that includes a lot of branching narratives so that the reader can choose their actions and see all the ways that that goes. So familiarity with branching narrative is also already embedded in a larger part of fan fiction writing. Lastly, my last reason for you at least is that a lot of fanfiction authors have a history or familiarity with community engagement and collaborative creation. You can see this in a lot of fandom events and type things. So zines, big bangs, which are kind of big month-long events where authors and artists get matched together and then work on a story collaboratively so that at the end you've got a longer piece of writing with artwork interspersed throughout it. You've also got other community events like character or arc weeks where people make fan works all devoted to one character or one arc of a story. You've got Secret Santa exchanges of fan fiction where people write gifts for each other, and so on and so forth. So not only do these fan fiction authors themselves have this familiarity with engaging with the community, have experience collaborating with others, including non-writers, on making projects. But if you and your studio, embrace fan works and have fun with them or encourage people to make them, you can tap into all of these types of community engagement, and build your studio and your team and your project's community. You'll have more people playing your game and talking about your game with each other, which can translate to all sorts of desired things like more sales or more stats to point to. When pitching or when making crowdfunding campaigns. And also, at the end of the day, you also just have more people who are talking about and engaging with your game because they enjoyed it or they want to iterate on it. And you get to, watch that happen and support it and have fun with it, which, for me, is a very large part of making games, of course, is wanting people to play them and have positive experiences. So, all that said, what does this mean to you? What are your takeaways? You should allow and encourage writing portfolios to contain fan fiction. And there are a couple ways to do this. You can just clarify that if you're asking for a speculative script, that fan fiction counts as that. You can also just mention that all types of media, including fan fiction, are okay. Um, but that doesn't mean that you have to accept any kind of content. You can still ask for genre and tone samples. You can ask for people to write fan fictions of certain IPs if you want to see if you're going for that kind of game, something inspired or similar to that game, a fan fiction of that game, if you will. So just even going out and directly saying something like this on your post, your job posting, will probably expand the pool of eligible applicants. If there are people trying to get their first writing gig for a game and don't necessarily have game credits, they might still have a huge, impressive backlog of other writing materials. And along with that, you can, again, get an immediate clue in to see how well that applicant can work with an existing piece of media, and see if they could join and jump into wherever your project's at. Another big takeaway is to challenge your ideas of legitimate or worthwhile writing and what beliefs or biases may be behind them. I just spent a pretty thorough time talking about why we don't take fan fiction seriously. And if you're going to be assessing the writing that's given to you, take some time to think about what you do or don't think as quality writing or what you do or don't think of as industry standard. Why do you think that? What are the steps that led you to believe in that? Are some of those steps potentially harmful, or do they, increase to the large barriers of entry for marginalized creators? And lastly, what does this mean for you? Write your own fan fiction. If you're not already writing your fan fiction, pick one up, try and make something fun and silly and self-indulgent. If you're already writing your fan fiction, shamelessly share it publicly. Don't be afraid to put it to your actual professional name as opposed to only behind a fandom username. And in fact, when you all share and write your beautiful fan fictions, share them with me. I want to read all of them. I'd be so excited to see the kind of things that you create. Because when we are, writing these things and writing stories and fan fictions, not only are we getting writing practice and growing our own skills and growing as an artist, it makes you happy and it will make others happy because there are always people out there who want to read the exact sort of fan fiction, the exact sort of anything that you're writing. And it can be very freeing to create something without a pressure or expectation of monetizing it. Like I said, please share your fan fictions with me. And feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm there at Wait What No Stop. Email me any questions. I'd love to talk about fan fiction and again read it. And if you would also like, you can find me on Archive of Our Own. I'm there as Sunset Dawn. You may notice I've only got one thing published there. I lost access to my old account where a lot of my stuff is and old flash drives over the years, but trust me, I promise that more is in progress. And lastly, I want to just thank you again for your time, and thank you to Wordplay and the Hand Eye Society for having me. I'm really so excited and honored to be a part of this event. I've had so much fun making this talk, and I just really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you again. Have a great day.
Well, that's Wordplay 2020. Thanks again to everyone who tuned in. Thanks to the volunteers. Thanks to the staff. Thanks for the Hand Eye Society members that made this thing happen. Thank you to the speakers. I sound like I'm getting a Grammy, but I'm not. It's everyone else. It's all you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much. Hand Eye Society appreciates all the support we could get in these sort of periods. So just thank you so much for making this happen. Please continue to follow us, follow the game creators. We're always doing things for the community, trying to do our best to, just make things a lot, better in these sort of situations, keep ourselves busy, talk about making games, collaborating, all that kind of stuff. So thank you so much for tuning in to Wordplay this year. We hope to announce more events like this soon, which is a hint. Thanks again, and stay safe, wear a mask, do what you gotta do to keep yourself and your friends and family safe. And we'll see you again soon.